Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military doctrine, military history, the qualities of great military personalities, individuals, and translate them into lessons that we can apply to our business and professional lives. So I've talked about this a couple times that there's so much training that are given to us who got to serve in the military, and you, our fellow citizens, were generous in paying for that training, and so this is a way for us to give something back to you from all the support that you've given us over the years, the decades, etc. So today I'm going to go overseas, as it were, and talk about a British officer, um, probably among the best known British officers who served during World War II. Probably the best known is Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who famously was constantly arguing or disputing, I should say, with among other people, General Patton. And in fact, none of the American commanders really liked him. And it's not at all clear that even Winston Churchill particularly liked Monty, as he called him. Monty was a pretty abrasive guy in many ways, but he wasn't a very effective commander. And in fact, he was the commander who replaced the person I'm going to be talking about today. And that person is Field Marshal Lord Archibald Wavell. Now, Lord Wavell had a long history in the British military by the time World War II came around. He was the son of a military officer, and he served in the Boer War, and also served in World War I. And then by the time World War II came around, he was the commander-in-chief of the Mideast in terms of British military activity. And we tend to think of the Mideast as being the area around Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon. And indeed, that was included in the Mideast region. But it also included, from a British military standpoint, Northern Africa. And so Lord Wavell, or Field Marshal Wavell, however you want to refer to him, was initially in charge of the North African campaign. And what's interesting is early on, he had a good deal of success against the Italians. And then probably the most famous German commander, whose name all of a sudden I went up on. Hold on one second here. I'm gonna get it for you because this is important. Why am I not remembering his name? The Desert Fox. What? Erwin Rommel. Oh, there you go. So when Erwin Rommel became the commander-in-chief of Axis forces in North Africa, he sort of kicked the tar out of the British, and that spelled the end of Lord Wavell's career as commander-in-chief of the Mideast region. And as you might imagine, after having had a long history in the British military, starting out from Sandhurst, which is essentially the British equivalent of West Point, and all those years, and becoming commander-in-chief of a key battle area in World War II, to be fired, and pretty summarily so, by the way, I can imagine, and I think we all can imagine how devastating that must have been for Lord Wavell. Now, in those days, and to a certain extent, this is true today, when you fire someone at that level, generally speaking, you don't just kick them out of the military and send them home. In Lord Wavell's case, he was transferred and made commander in chief of India. Now, for those of you who are familiar with World War II history, you probably know that India was not a hotbed um, of combat activity during World War II. And while Indian troops fought in many of the engagements in World War II, they were in other areas of other theaters of action. But while there were some sea battles, kind of around the area of India, the reality is that the closest real combat action really came down to like Burma, places like that. So India during World War II, in terms of combat opportunity and real, having a real impact on the outcome of the war, was kind of a backwater, number one. And number two, at the same time, it was very difficult because the Indian independence movement was going on. And so trying to maintain India within the British Empire while these disputes were going on was very, very difficult. And it was not a job that anybody in the British military would have envied Lord Wavell. So this was, pretty clearly a demotion on his part. And yet he really handled the situation in India probably as well as it could possibly have been handled. And a lot of that has to do with um, the, 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 the qualities that Lord Wavell brought to bear. So those that made him not really a particularly effective combat commander in Northern Africa, I think really made him just sort of coincidentally, because I don't think there was any plan to this, but they made him the right person to take over as commander in chief in India, and eventually he was appointed Viceroy of India, as a matter of fact. And he was really the one who, from the British side, worked through the process of Indian independence. And so out of this sort of, on some level, crushing defeat late in his career, we tend to think of failures as being something that comes early in our lives. We're young, we have failures, we recover, we go on to glory. What I find interesting about Lord Wavell's career is that probably his biggest failure came really toward the end of his career. And yet he was able to bounce back from it and play a very important role in the world, because India, as we know today, is becoming an ever more pivotal country in the world. It now has the largest population of any country. It overtook China earlier this year, I believe it was, or last year. And strategically is being pursued by pretty much all the powers, the United States, Russia, even China on some level wants to be, allied with India as long as India will do what, China says, kind of thing, which is, there's definitely a hate relationship going on there. So, Lord Wavell was, like I said, from the British side, the individual responsible for ushering in what has now become the modern day country of India. And so I'm going to talk about several qualities that he had that I think we should be looking at. Some of them as leaders, others as managers. Now, to the extent that we run our own businesses, and so we act as both leaders and managers, we want to develop all of these qualities. But I'm going to go through them. I have 7 of them that I've distilled. And by the way, I got a lot of this information from a biography that I am reading about Lord Wavell. It's quite interesting. His biographer, interesting, is kind of fawning, which makes me a little bit suspicious about just how accurate he's reporting. But I think that there was genuinely a lot in Lord Wavell's career to look at and say, wow, this really was, or this really is something exemplary and well worth learning from, which is one of the reasons why I like reading military biographies. So first of all, Lord Wavell was very adaptable, especially in his strategic thinking. So he had the ability to stand back from the situations in which he found himself and look at that larger picture, even as he would be wrapped up in more of the operational details sometimes, or hearing about this the tactical successes and failures of units under his command. And that ability to be able to step back and really see what's going on is crucial. As leaders, we have to be able to do that. We can't let ourselves get so wrapped up in the day-to-day situations that we lose our broader perspective. We are the ones that need to create and maintain the strategic vision. And so it's incredibly important for us to be able to maintain that. And that was certainly the case for Lord Wavell. And that stood him in very good stead when he got transferred to India. The strategy of a battle, the art of war, so to speak, can be learned. Okay, and I'm a big fan of George Patton. He taught himself the strategy of war, and indeed many of the great military leaders, they didn't magically know the strategy of war. There are principles that you can follow that will hold you in good stead. But when it comes to the political arena, the principles are much foggier and much less defined. And so being able to stand back and look at a situation strategically and see what may be going on, or what may be going on, what is going on, and what may need to be changed is a very important skill. It's something, for example, that Henry Kissinger had. I think Kissinger passed away. It was one of his greatest talents, is to be able to see that big picture, which and grasp really what was going on, so that then he could analyze it and make decisions about what changes needed to happen. And that was something that Lord Wavell was very good at. The next thing he was good at was learning from setbacks. So in order to recover from the beating that he took at Rommel's hands as commander-in-chief of the Mideast, he really had to pull himself up by his bootstraps. And I would argue, I think this is somewhat counterintuitive. I think it's harder to bounce back from a big failure when our careers are so advanced, when we are perhaps at the pinnacle of our success. So they always say, making your second million is easier than making your first million. That may be true, but recovering from setbacks when we're young, when we're more naturally resilient, I think is much easier than recovering from setbacks that we experience when we're older, and especially farther along in our careers. So this is one of the reasons why, just parenthetically, for example, you see that the suicide rate among older men is so high, especially older men who are divorced, right? To have that loss at that point in their lives, many men find that to be crushing. Just they can't seem to recover from it. And I think this speaks to what could have happened to a less resilient individual than Lord Wavell. So he could have let his being fired as commander-in-chief Mideast essentially end his career, but he didn't. He took the attitude, I'm a soldier, I am a good soldier, and okay, I'm not going to be commander Mideast anymore. Now I'm going to be commander India. This is clearly a demotion, but I still have my job to do. I still have my orders to carry out. I still have my mission to meet. And he was able to meet that challenge and really, exude, I mean, exude is the wrong word, really demonstrate resiliency through the adversity. So learning from setbacks leads to really resiliency in adversity. And that's what Lord Wavell had. Now, the height of it was certainly toward the end of his career, but it was really a trait that he exhibited throughout his life. Where did it come from? Native resiliency, it's hard to say. This is one of those characteristics that, like, you take someone like the great golfer, Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods started learning how to play golf when he was, I think, 5 years old. His father was teaching him. Where did the discipline and resiliency come from that Tiger Woods has exhibited his whole career? He's had injuries, he's had personal things happen, and yet he's time and again he's able to press forward and be the great champion that he is, right? Where do these qualities come from? That's hard to say. I remember reading a book one time called "Talent is Overrated," and I agree with. I believe the author is Jeff Colvin, that indeed I think talent is overrated, because much of what we call talent is actually comes from somebody having very good teachers from a very early age, and so they're able to develop skills over a lot longer period of time than most of us. That was the case with Tiger Woods. It was the case with Mozart, other people like that, so-called child prodigies. Oftentimes, it's not that they were born that way, it's that they practice so much more and for so much longer than most other people. It just seems like they're prodigies, right? But where does the discipline and the resilience come from? That's a separate question, and it's very hard to say. And Colvin, in the end, doesn't have an answer for that. So, to the extent that we're born with a quality, maybe self-discipline and resilience is it. But certainly, Lord Wavell had that quality, and I think we can teach ourselves to be more self-disciplined, to be more resilient, okay, to have a more resilient mindset, to adopt habits that will help us be more self-disciplined. And if we keep building on those over time, we will. Will we ever get to the level of a Tiger Woods or a Lord Wavell? I don't know, but these are qualities that we can improve, if not become absolute paragons in. Okay, so the next, and this relates back a little bit to his adaptability and strategic thinking, is Lord Wavell had the ability to have a vision and do long-term planning and work those plans through. So once he stepped back and saw the situation as it really was, he had the ability to see, where did I need to go? Now, obviously, not always. As a combat commander, that faculty or that skill evaded him. But as the commander in chief of India and later Viceroy, he was able to see that, you know, the in the end, the reason that Mohandas Gandhi was successful in his uh, movement to gain Indian independence was that um, Lord Wavell he was not going to pursue scorched earth tactics in order to maintain India as a crown colony. And in that sense, Mohandas Gandhi was sort of fortunate in who his enemy was, so to speak, because looking at it in the long term, I think it became inevitable to Lord Wavell that he saw that Gandhi and his followers were too committed to independence and nonviolence, and that in the face of that, there really wasn't anything that the British could do. Now, that's not to say there weren't violent clashes. There were during the movement for Indian independence, and at times the British did things that I'm pretty sure in retrospect they wish that they regret having done, because they do not come out well in those incidents. Having said that, if Gandhi had been up against, let's say, an Adolf Hitler, the circumstances likely would have been very, very different, or the results, I should say, would likely have been very, very different. I don't think that Adolf Hitler would have hesitated to kill hundreds of thousands or even millions of Indians if he thought that that's what it took to keep India subjugated. And likewise today, whether we're talking about a Vladimir Putin or a Xi Jinping, um, you know, these are people who, think nothing of invading neighboring countries or killing portions of their population that they feel are not, sufficiently embedded in Chinese culture, like the Uyghurs. So Lord Wavell, I think, had a vision of how things were going to work out, and he realized that in the end, India had to be put on a path to independence. Next, Lord Wavell was an effective communicator. So I was having this conversation with somebody last night, and the tendency is to say that communication is good relationships. That's not correct. Communication is an important tool in building good relationships, and that's what Lord Wavell was able to do. He was able to communicate clearly, he was able to communicate calmly, and especially in a crisis when other people might have lost their heads, Lord Wavell was able to remain calm. And people, I think, really respect that and are drawn to it. So I'm reading right now Barbara Tuchman's great book about August 1914, The Guns of August. It's the beginning of World War I. And the British commander, Sir John French, I believe it is as she describes him, he's, as the Germans are invading Belgium and then into France, Sir French, uh, he can't take the pressure. He's screaming at people. He's unable to think coherently at times. Right. This is not the traits of a great leader. Not something that we want to emulate. And in fact, again, I was having a conversation with a friend last night. He happens to be in the tech world. And he was telling me about the amount of screaming that goes on, in some of the staff meetings in between, him and his supervisor and such. And I finally said, this is not appropriate behavior. Screaming in the workplace is not appropriate. It is not good leadership. So we as leaders need to emulate Lord Wavell's practice, which was to stay calm, to stay focused, work on the problem, deal with the personalities where that has to be dealt with, but otherwise continue with good, solid communication that gets us where we want to go. Next, and I think this is particularly important for Lord Wavell's situation and for business situations, is he had an ability to balance military and political roles. Now, comparing him to, say, George Patton. George Patton didn't care a whit about politics. At least that's what he would say. Now, he knew how to sort of schmooze and talk to military commanders and that kind of thing. But when it came to dealing with politics, like international politics, he had no patience for that. In fact, famously, his attitude at the end of World War II was, well, we have all these big armies in Germany, we need to go into Russia and get rid of the communists there, right? So, look, you could certainly make the case that he had a point, although Russia has been the graveyard of so many large armies. Who knows if the United States would have been successful, but the odds were that they weren't, which is why in the end, Eisenhower thought Patton was crazy for voicing that opinion. But that certainly was not the opinion of someone who knew how to balance military and political roles. And Patton never claimed to be someone who could do that. Lord Wavell was different. He realized that there had to be a balance in these roles, that the military in the end was a tool of statecraft. So the military action was there to serve the ends of political leaders. And especially as Viceroy of India, where he was responsible for much of the political goings on in India, he had to balance those two roles of commander-in-chief and viceroy, when to use the so-called carrot, when to use the stick. And that was something that he was very good at. In our businesses too, I think we need to figure out what is the right mix of incentive versus, I don't want to use the word punishment because I don't think we should be punishing our people, but sometimes we need to have candid talks with employees who either are not performing as well as they should, or who have made decisions that they ought not to have made. And so, we can't just sort of say, oh, well, you made a bad decision, we're going to move on. No, before we move on, we need to go through it. How did that decision get made? Why did you decide that way? What might you do next time differently to come up with a better result? So I did a whole show on this a couple weeks ago about my father being on a destroyer and ramming in a boat, and how his commanding officer handled it. And he didn't just pat my dad on the head and say, good boy, thanks for, ruining a boat. No, on the other hand, he didn't yell at him either. What he did was he sat down with him and worked through it. So there are times we need to do that. We can't always be saying, good job, good job, good job. We need to be balancing our roles, both as leaders and in particular as managers. Always keeping in mind, going back to the previous point, we need to communicate effectively. And then finally, and this may have been Lord Wavell's most outstanding point, which is why I saved it for last. He believed in behaving ethically, morally, with integrity. That was embedded in him from an early age. And going back to what I was saying about interactions with Gandhi, when you have an opponent who has a very deep moral core, so even when he does things that were morally wrong, he's likely to be as repelled by them as the people who the actions were taken against. And that's an important quality for us as leaders to have. Sometimes we do have to fire someone. Sometimes we do have to rebuke someone. And we should be doing so out of our moral cores, not out of pleasure at calling someone onto the carpet or yelling at someone. No, it should be coming from our desire to be a good human being, as well as help others improve. And in so doing, we take what is ostensibly punitive and we create an opportunity for growth. In order to do that effectively, we have to be clear about our moral code, our ethics, why we're doing these things. And we've got to mean them. We can't paint them over with a code of, well, this is for your own good. No, not that's way too flippant. We have to be clear, morally clear inside, especially when we're doing something that could cause one of our team members to question their commitment to the team, question their quality as a team member, question something about their conduct, their work, their progress, etc. Okay? People can feel these coming from us. You can call it empathy, whatever you want to call it. Okay? They can feel our motives. And so we've got to be clear about our moral core, like Lord Wavell was. And if we are, then much of what we do will be effective, because even if our team members disagree with us, they'll sense that we're coming from the right place. And so they'll be willing to follow or to approach us with input if they really think we're off base, knowing that we're going to be open to hearing it. And even if we reject it, give them a good hearing and an opportunity to ask their questions. Those are all not just good leadership lessons, they're good people lessons, they're good life lessons, right? And they come from wanting to be and actually being ethical leaders, people acting with integrity. And that's who Lord Wavell was. So he had adaptability and the ability to look at the big strategic picture. He learned from his setbacks, and in so doing was able to exhibit a lot of resilience in adversity. He had the ability to have a vision and do long-term planning, and then communicate effectively with the other members of his staff. He was able to balance his roles, in his case, military and political roles. And finally, He led from a very strong ethical, moral core, doing his best to always act with integrity, even in those times when he did not. He eventually came back to that core. So if we can exhibit these same qualities, work on them, develop them, so then in running our businesses or in working within our practices or even working for someone else, we'll be much more effective leaders and managers. So that's the lesson that came from Lord Wavell having this failure late in his career, and yet still going on to really triumphing, I think, not only in his own eyes, but in British history as well. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Always interested in hearing your comments, good and bad. So you can drop a comment in social media, or if it's something you want to say privately, you can send me an email. All those links will be in the show notes. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And I postponed this from last week because the data wasn't available. We will be doing our monthly economic echoes and talking about how changes in the economy affect each one of us as individuals. So I invite you to join me for that. And then next Monday at 10 a.m. is my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. All these times are Pacific times. And then a week from today, we'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So thanks again for watching. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and signing off. Marie, you